Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is. Thank you for tuning in to Conversations with Dr. Don. The show is produced and broadcast from the Portland, Oregon, USA area. And for your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of 1-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting guests, like my guest this evening, Alan Zundel. We're going to talk about who he is personally, and then we will talk in the second half of the show about his running for Oregon Secretary of State. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
How are you feeling? Okay?
Oh, sure.
You're not nervous?
No.
I am. I always am. All right.
I was nervous last night.
Yeah, you had a big crowd then. You just have you to deal with right now.
I prefer TV to talking in front of people.
Mm-hmm. More relaxing, huh? A little personal stuff about myself, instead of just your bio. Occasionally I'll repeat what people know about me already. I was born in New Orleans, Louisiana, of red, white, and black Roman Catholic parentage on December 26, 1928. Today I'm a-religious and accepting of all others. I'm a retired PhD clinical psychologist and present-day television broadcast journalist. I am the 12th of 12 children, am married, and am the father of 5 daughters by a first marriage. Politically, I'm a progressive populist activist, still learning how to live lovingly. A few of my heroes include Jesus, Gandhi, MLK, and any other fellow human who is currently living lovingly. All right, you ready for me now?
Yes.
If I were to ask your best friend, who is Alan, what would your best friend say? Be your best friend. Alan is what?
Alan is a multifaceted person.
Mm-hmm.
I think most people would say I have a good sense of humor. And restless. I keep moving from one project to another. I've had a number of different career paths over the course of my life.
I've noticed, yeah, reading your literature.
Yeah, I guess I just have a lot of curiosity about the world and people in particular. I like people, and I've always been interested in what makes them tick and what could make their lives better as well.
So, yeah. So anything significant about your racial or national or cultural heritage that's worth saying to the viewers?
I don't know how significant it is. Growing up, all I knew is that my mother's side of the family was Irish because her father, my grandfather, came from Ireland when he was a young man. And on my father's side, his mother was Polish. But both my grandfathers died. My Irish grandfather died when I was very young. My other grandfather died way before I was born, so I didn't know much about that side of the family. It took me years to find out that most of my heritage was actually Germanic. My family name, Zundel, is a Germanic
That's what I thought.
name, yeah.
Yeah. Do you have a religious preference now?
Not right now, no.
Did you have one?
Well, yeah, I was raised a Roman Catholic Christian.
I know, I can see in your eyes.
Yes, can you tell? Yeah, that guilty look. Actually, I didn't. It wasn't a guilt-laden trip for me growing up, as a lot of people say it was. It wasn't like that at all for me. In fact, I found the stories of Jesus really compelling, and I think they had a big impact on me. Mm-hmm. When I was a teenager, I just drifted away from that, became an atheist pretty much. Then I got off on a spiritual quest because I felt like there was more to this than I had first had thought. Spent many years, I took up meditation, and eventually went back to the Catholic Church and was interested in their tradition of mysticism and meditation. Mm-hmm. I had a long time interest in Zen Buddhism as well. But now I'm more or less kind of universally respectful of all religious and a-religious points of view, I hope.
Yeah. Some similarities, so I'm hearing about you so far because I was a Roman Catholic kid. Ultra born,
yeah.
all that stuff.
Yeah, me too. I don't remember the Latin too well. Kyrie eleison.
Yeah, makeup and that. Your formal education, say a few words out loud about that.
My formal education, you mean like my higher education?
Yeah.
I went to Michigan State University right out of high school, but then I dropped out after 1 quarter, and I didn't go back for 10 years.
Why did you drop out?
it just wasn't, it wasn't of interest to me. It seemed like an extension of high school, and I was more interested, what I really wanted to do at that phase of my life is make movies and be a film comedian.
Fascinating.
And I didn't see how school was going to help me do that.
That isn't anywhere in your written material.
So I had a friend who also wanted to be a movie comedian, and we paired up and we performed a bit and tried to learn to make movies. But that, you know, after a few years, you realize that's shooting high, and it wasn't really what I wanted to do as I matured, which takes, you know, I'm still in that process of maturing. But that's what I wanted to do. So 10 years later, I went back to school, actually because I was so interested in different religions and got involved in the spirituality and the spiritual quest that I mentioned earlier. I went back to school to study comparative religions. And my major in my undergraduate program was religious studies with a secondary emphasis on psychology and a little bit of political science. But I graduated when I was about 33, I think, finally got my BA degree. And then I went to Wayne State University and did a master's degree in political science, emphasizing political philosophy because I was interested in the contemporary debates about the economy and politics. Reagan was in office at the time, and there was a lot of debate about government being bigger or smaller. Do we need to cut taxes? The welfare state versus, you know, conservatives and liberals. And I wanted to try to sort all that out. Where do these conversations come from? What do they mean? Understand it better. And that led me to do, I enjoyed teaching because I was a teaching assistant when I was in graduate school. So I went into a PhD program. By that time, I had a wife and 2 kids with me. And it took me quite a few years to get through my PhD program, teaching part-time and going to classes. So I finished PhD and moved my emphasis to public policy studies because I wanted to have more of a real world impact.
As you mentioned spiritual, what does it mean to be spiritual?
I don't know. The word actually, I mean, I'm interested in where words come from. Spirit means breath. Yeah. And so is the sense that breath is related to life, and it has and it's invisible, we can't see it, yet we need it, we rely on it, we can't live without it. So to me, spirituality is really about the fundamentals of life, you know, what really gives us life, not just in the sense of physical nutrition, but in the sense of our whole person. Who are we here? What is our place in the world?
I can see the influence of your Buddhism learning.
Yes. If I spoke about it a while, I'd sound a lot more Buddhist than I would Christian, I think.
Yeah, I've been accused of looking kind of like a Buddhist. I say, thank you very much.
Yes. Yeah.
How about other education that's worth mentioning? Anything
well, not anything
more unusual?
Formal. I mean, the School of Hard Knocks, maybe.
Yeah.
I've been in that a little bit. It's been an education running for office, I could say that.
Oh my gosh.
You'll learn a lot about, you hear other people speak, you learn something about politics and policy ideas, and you also learn about yourself, what you're good at, what you're not so good at.
Okay, you mentioned spiritual, and I wonder, what do you mean by spiritual or spirituality? What does that mean for you?
Well, I think if you asked me at different moments in time, I would probably give you different answers.
Of course.
Yeah, spirit. I've always been interested in the origins of words, and this comes from the Latin, from the Latin for breath.
Yeah.
And so, you know, there's Holy Spirit means holy breath in the Christian tradition. So it's like what animates us, what gives us life, what guides us in life. Just like the wind is invisible, your breath is invisible. The wind kind of moves in a different direction, and your breath keeps you alive and gives you life. So all that, the fundamentals of life, what your life is about, where is it taking you, what really brings you to life, all that kind of stuff.
Boy, that's a long description compared to what I've been getting through the years.
Yes.
It's very interesting.
Is
yeah.
it?
Yeah, I'm learning from you, yeah. And what do you do in a typical day nowadays? Are you have any money earning capability anymore?
Not as much as I'd like to have. But where I earn an income is I have a part-time mental health counseling practice. And it's become very part-time as I've been running for Secretary of State. But it's my wife mostly supports us. at this point. She's still working full-time as a nurse. Other than that, we're not ready to retire, so I hope to keep earning a living for a while.
Yeah. So in Eugene, do you have a private office? Do you have an office in your home or what?
I have a private office, yeah. I share it with another therapist.
What kind of clients do you see? You have court referrals and
No,
heavy-duty
it's
stuff?
people who come to me, usually through their insurance. They look for counselors on their insurance plan, and they see mine and check my website, and for one reason or another, they think I'd be a good fit for them.
Do you have any stories about the clients you've seen in recent years? Any juicy stuff?
Well, I shouldn't do that.
I know better.
There are plenty of those, but I can't do that.
Yeah. I got some stories about those too. And you mentioned your wife.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have a boyfriend or any other things like that?
Me?
Yeah.
Not me. I hope she doesn't either. We have two grown children. They live in San Diego, and a granddaughter.
Oh, okay. And your political persuasion, or you're a Trump supporter?
No, I don't even find him that entertaining anymore.
Yeah.
His act is worn out its welcome as far as I'm concerned.
It's scary for me.
It is. It's very scary. Most of my life it's hard to say. I kind of bounced around, not too far, mostly on the liberal left, even socialist end of the perspective. Right now, really, I'd say it's still towards that end, but I think we need a whole new vocabulary for the 21st century, because the fights of the 20th century aren't going to be the same ones we're having now. People realize the economy's changed in fundamental ways. Once that catches up with the political system, we'll have to find a new way of talking about the dilemmas we're facing and the problems and what we're going to do about them.
Well, someone I was talking to last night about the so-called two-party system, which I always said it's just two wings of the same party, the corporate party, crony capitalism, and then we have a new party coming into being. If we're being authentic or real here, it's what Trump is about. It's a second party, really, and then the third party is socialists of some sort, stripe or another, like we're about. And I'm
and then there's the libertarians as well.
I'm talking about three major considerations that we can subsume all the others under those three descriptions, yeah. But, okay. Trick question, ready? The difference between sympathy and empathy and compassion. Sympathy, empathy, and compassion. What's the difference between those?
Well, sympathy is somebody's in a state of emotion and you have the same emotion watching them. You feel like I see you're upset, that makes me upset. I see you're sad, now I'm sad too. That's sympathy. Empathy means I understand and can put myself in your shoes. I'm not necessarily feeling what you're feeling, but I'm definitely listening and hearing and letting you know that I am open to what you're experiencing. Compassion is the attitude of wishing for you your best health and happiness, the best for you, wanting for other people. It's like a heart thing, an open heart toward other people.
Feeling what's going on in you, not just hearing what you're talking about or thinking about it, or feeling sympathetic, but experiencing the physiological manifestations of the particular struggle that you're having right now, for example, as an add to your descriptions.
Well, everybody, I think, struggles to be more compassionate, and we all sense that this is the key to happiness in life, is being more compassionate toward other people.
Yeah. Memberships in political, social, or civic organizations that come to mind that you care to mention or not?
Well, I'm in the Green Party.
Oh, yes.
I'm registered with the Green Party. I'm also their state secretary and on their state coordinating committee, as well as a candidate for office.
When did you decide to become a candidate for this office?
I think it was earlier this year. I was thinking about it last year, but this year I finally made a decision to do it. And that was because I felt one of us should run for Secretary of State, because elections, for number one, our party needs to run statewide candidates to maintain our ballot line. To stay on the ballot, we have to get a certain percentage of a statewide vote for an office.
Yeah.
So we need to run somebody for at least one statewide office and preferably more than one. So we knew we'd have a presidential candidate. We had no idea how well she would do this year with Bernie Sanders running. It might have taken away a lot of votes. So we got me and we got our guy running for the U.S. Senate. But I was thinking also we should be talking about elections and the two-party system and bringing in ranked choice voting. So I wanted to use that as a platform for doing that.
Yeah. Persons from the past that you particularly liked or admired, any names come to mind for you?
I think you mentioned some of them already. Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. jumped to mind.
Yeah, those are mine.
Yeah.
Yours too?
Those would be at the top of my list, certainly. I admire some people for, well, like I told you earlier, I wanted to be a film comedian, so I admired the workmanship of certain classic comedians like Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, Laurel and Hardy.
We laugh as we think about him, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you see the mainstream media? Is it left, right, or centrist?
You know, I hardly watch it or read it anymore. I would say it's pretty, centrist isn't the right word, it's more establishment. You got one political establishment, and both parties pretty much support that establishment as well as the major media.
Okay, so...
Let me put it this way. None of them want to see a fundamental challenge to the power relationships in our economy and our political situation.
Overall, then, the establishments would be considered centrist or left or right?
I would say more centrist. But, you know, some Democrats call themselves left, but I don't see that as very left.
Yeah. Do you listen to or view alternative media?
Yeah. I listen pretty regularly to Democracy Now!
Yay! Amy, she's heroic.
Yeah, she is. I read things online. I also read the local paper down in Eugene and the Eugene Weekly, the weekly there. But I like to read books mostly. I think books are much more informative. We have a wonderful library in Eugene.
Okay. So, what's right with America today?
What's right with America?
Yeah,
There's a lot of things right with America. I mean,
name a few.
I think most of the citizens really, their hearts are in the right place. They really genuinely want to do well for the country and for other people in the world. I don't think they're terrifically well informed about our country's role in the rest of the world. But I think the values of America that everybody believes in are still present in most people's minds. They get distorted sometimes, but the sense that we want to see other people prosper and have freedom and that kind of thing, I think those values are great. I wish we lived up to them more fully.
Yeah. So, in a few words, it's going to be hard to answer this question. What's wrong with America today?
Where to start with that? I don't want to sound negative. It's just I think they're interlocking, so it's hard even to say that.
Of course.
First of all, our economy's changing in ways that aren't well understood, and the political system has not at all caught up with it. That's a much longer and deeper conversation, I think.
Of course.
But I think a lot goes back to that. And you see it in the fact that the very, very wealthy are continually getting more wealthy, whereas everybody else is kind of fighting for the scraps. Wages stayed pretty stagnant since the 1970s. And the only way a lot of households were able to keep afloat was, first of all, women went to work. So a family would be putting in a lot more work hours to maintain the same standard of living, and then using credit cards, home equity loans, all that kind of stuff, just to try to maintain a standard of living, hoping that the economy would pick up again and they would be able to catch up and catch their breath. So something's happening economically, and I think it's endangering the majority of the population.
What do we need to do to fix what's wrong with America?
I think, first of all, we need to change our election system so we can get other voices into the conversation. I think when Bernie Sanders ran, it was a very hopeful thing because at least he had a different perspective than the one you usually hear. At least he had a much bigger platform for being heard, even though I think he's his ideas were pretty much a throwback to New Deal liberalism.
Mm-hmm.
And I would, as much as I think that was good for the time, I think we need to move forward into something a little different. But to open up the political conversation, we need to change the election system, because right now what we're getting is what we earlier called centrists. Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump is not a centrist exactly. He's not on the political spectrum at all. He's just his own person, like most demagogues are.
You have a thought or a memory right now that makes you smile as you think about it? You just had a whole
what we were just talking about. It's sad that the political situation invokes laughter, because it really is a dangerous situation, I think. But it's so far-fetched that it's almost comical.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So let's take a break here for a few minutes, and the mics will be off, and then we'll put some posters up on the screen. You can read what we're showing the viewers. There's one right there. Okay, we're back. Thanks for staying tuned. For you viewers who missed the opening of the show, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals, and about whatever it is we've decided to talk about tonight. And Alan Zundel is certainly an interesting people.
Well, thank you.
For a number of reasons. So, let's see. The job of Secretary of State. What is the Secretary of State?
Well, they do a lot of different things, but I'd say the most important job of the Secretary of State is supervising elections throughout the state.
Uh-huh.
They have to make sure all county clerks are doing their job properly, and that there's no irregularities or no mischief going on in the voting process and the recording of votes and all that. So fundamentally, make sure elections go smoothly and the counts are accurate, so that we can trust, that the people have been elected properly. So that's the main job of the Secretary of State. The rest of the Secretary of State's functions have mostly to do with record keeping.
Mm-hmm.
There's supervision of the corporate division, where corporations register with the state. There's the Audits division, where we have people looking at how well government agencies are performing and whether there is room for improvement there. And there's also small business, an Office of Assistance for Small Business. So a lot of varied things that have been added to the office at one period of time or another, I guess. I don't know really how they all came together like that. Secretary of State also serves as one of 3 on the State Land Board, which is like totally outside of all those other jobs. So that's something else.
Varied responsibilities, huh?
Yeah, they do a lot of different things, but mostly they oversee a big bureaucracy of people who are already there working and doing their job, and the person who's elected is like the person on top who makes sure everybody else is doing what they do without problems, kind of like the chief administrator for the whole division, and to maybe nudge it in a particular direction or another based on why they came into the position, what they think they should do with it.
How'd you decide to run for that particular position compared to other positions?
Well, I've been interested in election reform for at least 15 years, maybe longer, and I've worked on it off and on, including when I first moved to Oregon 10 years ago. We had an effort going to try to bring ranked choice voting closer to realization in Oregon. But then with the crash of 2008 and all the emphasis on the economy and budget, that had to kind of take a sidetrack in my life anyway, and then recently got involved in it again. So I see the Secretary of State as an office that's like prime property for coming in and talking about election reform, bringing the attention of the public and the legislature to how we can improve the functioning of our democracy.
And so then if we do something about the present system, then we'll have a more democratic.
That would be the hope.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be the intention.
Voters are fed up with the current election system, the limited choices, the role of money, and the results it often produces. I'm reading from your material here.
Think of the presidential election, and that will make sense.
All of the candidates for this office will promise election reform, but ask yourself a simple question. Are candidates from parties which depend on big campaign donations and have benefited from our current election system likely to produce real reform or just superficial changes? If somebody else is going to wins your spot, Secretary of State, superficial changes, is that what they're going to be going for rather than dramatic changes?
Well, I don't. Brad Avakian is promising changes to the office, but not so much in the area of election reform. He does talk about campaign financing reform, but the Secretary is not in much of a position to do something about that because it requires constitutional amendment, both at the national level for federal elections and at the state level for state and local elections. So they can talk about it, they can push the legislature, but you need to amend the Constitution. It's a big, big job. He's kind of an activist. He has an activist vision for the Secretary of State's job, but I haven't heard him really focus on election reform per se. Dennis Richardson has talked more about being an administrator and being nonpartisan. Although he has expressed interest in some of the ideas I've expressed and says he'd like to create a commission if he's elected to look into election reform. I don't know how much emphasis he might give to that or what would come out of that, but we'll wait and see if that happens.
Okay, let me mention a few of the things you've listed here. You say, I will address the systemic problems of our elections and promote reforms to give voters more choices, reduce the role of money, and create fair conditions for all candidates. I support ranked choice voting. Will you say a few words about ranked choice voting? I think I remember what it is.
Well, that's at the top of my list because I think that would be the most fundamental reform we can enact to achieve all those other goals. In ranked choice voting, instead of coming in, and this is the general election, not the primary. So in the primary, all the parties choose their candidates with whatever method is in place.
Sure.
And some of those could use some reform as well. But in ranked choice voting, then you come to the general election, and the voter, instead of just picking one candidate, has the option of ranking the candidates. And the ballot could, it depends on how the ballot is set up and the law is, at least 3 candidates, but maybe all of them. You could say, my first choice is this candidate, my second choice is this candidate, my third choice is this candidate. And then what happens is they count all the first choice votes, and if somebody gets a majority, they win. But if nobody gets a majority, nobody wins yet, which is unlike now. Right now, if somebody comes in with less than a majority, but still they have more than anybody else, they win. That's what creates the spoiler dynamic.
Yes.
Because you think if this guy's winning with 35% of the vote and I got 30%, but this other candidate got 10% that might have gone to me, he's a spoiler. He spoiled the vote for me. I would have won otherwise. So it tends to collect everybody into 2 big parties where not everybody gets a voice, right? Because the parties are so vast, they try to include so many people.
You want everyone to have a voice.
I would like everyone to have a voice. So if nobody wins the first round, then whichever candidate came in very last in the first round of counting, they're out, and each of their votes is redistributed to each of those voters that voted for them second choice and added into the first choice votes. So it's like a runoff. It's like an instant runoff because this is all done in the computer in the vote tabulator. You count the first choice ranks and nobody wins. The last guy is out. Now you got the rest left. How do they do? All the votes from the last guy are redistributed, added in. Anybody win? No. Last guy is out, redistribute them. So it goes like that until somebody gets a majority of whichever votes are left.
Wow, that's so simple, huh?
It's simple for the voter. You simply rank the candidates the way you really prefer them.
Sure.
It's a little complex to explain how it works, but I think it's the reverse of what we have now. Because what we have now, it's very easy to explain who wins. You say whoever gets the most votes wins.
Yeah.
And most people think that means whoever gets a majority, but it's not. Okay? But it's the complicated part is deciding who to vote for when you like a candidate that you think doesn't have as good a chance of winning, so you're going to vote for somebody else because you don't want somebody even further to win. Like, take me. I would like to vote for Jill Stein, but I would consider, should I vote for Hillary Clinton so that Donald Trump doesn't win? So people end up voting for someone they don't really even want to vote for because they're afraid of that spoiler dynamic. So how you cast your vote is complicated. But with this, it's simple. You vote for who you really like first. If they don't make it, I got to back up in my second choice.
You explained it so very, very well. Make it very, very, very clear.
Well, I'm glad you find it so.
Yes, you do a good job. A constitutional amendment to permit campaign finance limits. Campaign finance. Well, what are the super rich going to do if they can't buy the people running our
They'll still
government?
find ways. They'll still find ways. Believe me, they will. Which is why I don't think campaign finance reform is the most important thing we could be doing, because any kind of reform you get, and this is the history of election reform. They put in place reform. For a while it seems to be working, and then the people, the lobbyists and big money people find ways around it. Money finds a way.
So it's a constant battle.
Yeah, it's a constant battle, because whenever you have a very unequal society in terms of economics, the very rich are going to want more power, and they're going to have things at stake that they want to preserve. Why I think ranked choice voting would help with the problem of money in politics is because it gives voters somewhere to go other than the two major parties. If you feel the Democrats and Republicans are listening too much to their donors and not enough to the voters, then you can go to a different party. Without that spoiler problem, the voters start drifting off. So those two candidates have to now say, we need to listen to the voters more, even at the cost of our donors, because if we don't, we're not even going to get it in office.
Have you thought about wealth control?
Which control?
Wealth control.
Wealth control.
Mm-hmm.
Secretary of State,
radical.
not much I could do about that. I think
I'm curious about your opinion about those kinds of things.
I'm not sure what you mean by that. I think the inequality in our country is definitely a problem, and it's not just because our economy is, it's not just because the wealthy are doing such a good job that they get more money. It's skewed.
Well, if a person has really more money than they can ever use for their own life and family, then they're using it to buy politicians.
Yeah, that happens.
But if they don't have, if they're limited in the amount of wealth that they have, not income, but wealth, overall wealth, then they can't influence the electoral process.
Oh, sure, it'd be harder.
Now, yeah.
I guess my question is wealth control we're taking from the wealthy after they become wealthy? What I'm more interested in is how money gets distributed in the first place and why people are getting more of that share of it than they would have under different arrangements. So it's how wealth is generated and distributed in the first place. Not so much redistribution, although that would have to happen because it's already distributed so badly, but how is it distributed in the first place?
Okay, well,
that's pretty far outside the role of the Secretary of State.
I know. I'm interested in your views on some of these things because you may be promoted before long and be running for a national office.
Oh, who knows?
Public funding for candidates, how does that work?
How does that work? Okay, it works in different ways in different places, but the general idea is that because money is so important in running a campaign, you provide money to candidates who agree to limit their spending to a certain amount, okay? So take a candidate like me. If I say I agree not to spend more than this, then the government must give me a certain amount of money to spend on my campaign. That gives me a viable campaign and makes me less dependent on campaign donors.
How are you going to get the people in power nowadays to agree to that? Because they want to have all the money available to still
Well, the only way you can get, the only real power you have against the people in power now is your vote. And that's why election reform is so important. The only tool we have is the vote to counter the effects of the power of money. That's the way I see it. You've got the power of money on one side and the power of the vote on the other side. That's not to say they're necessarily antagonists all the time.
Sure.
But I think for most people, their real power in the political system is where they cast their vote. And that's why election reform is important. You want to empower the voters. That's what you want to do.
All right, stronger fusion voting. We touched on that earlier on in ranked choice voting.
Well, fusion voting is when a party can nominate for an office the candidate of another party.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, the Progressive Party could nominate the Green Party candidate, and both parties could support them. That's permitted in Oregon, but it doesn't really do a party a lot of good. It's for a small party, it's more or less saying, we'll allow you to endorse one of the major party candidates. You know, it's kind of saying, well, Green Party here, we'll do you a favor. We'll let you endorse the Democratic candidate.
I've noticed the ballot.
Because you know they're not going to endorse us. It's always us having to endorse one of them.
Oh, right. Here's one that's been interesting to me. Updated voting technology to increase security. Voting technology, that's an important consideration nowadays.
It is.
Huh?
And it confuses people when I talk about it because I've realized they think, well, we just write in our ballot and mail it in so that we don't go and do it on a computer screen. So what's the technology? What they don't see is one of these ballots come into the county clerk, they're fed into a machine that records them. It's a computerized machine that counts your votes and adds them up. And that's where the problem potentially could lie. Of course, the security of the ballot is important, who's controlling the ballots and making sure they're all safe and secure and counted properly. But once you feed it into the machine, it's how that machine is counting the votes that you want to look at. And right now, we buy these machines from private vendors, and they're the only one who, yes, there's a bunch of, well, Diebold, I think they changed their name or went out of business or were bought out. Yes. But there's a variety of them. ClearVote and ES&S.
Yeah.
There's a variety of them, really a few big ones. But they know what the computer code is, but we don't. So we don't know how susceptible it is to hacking. We don't know how safe it is or how secure or how reliable.
Well, it's private. They own it.
They own it.
They don't want
That's their point.
You guys to know about it because then you...
Yeah, we can buy the machine and use it, but we don't know what's in the software. So what I'd like to see, open source software means it's open for public view. Every computer specialist can get access to it and look at it and say, here's a problem with your code, here's what would need to be fixed. And others can look at that and say, well, you're right, or no, for this reason you shouldn't. So eventually, many minds working on it ends up in something that's more secure. They're looking into it in Los Angeles, and I've just heard from the county clerk in Marion County that Austin, Texas has also looked into it. So I'm very interested in finding out what they've learned about it and if they're going to implement it, because I think Oregon should try something like that as well if it proves to be feasible.
You've done your homework.
I have.
Yeah. I know.
In elections, at least.
Enough to know. Updated, so open source.
Mm-hmm.
How about some of these countries, primitive countries around the world, pardon my use of that term, and they have paper ballots and they count them.
Yeah, that works pretty well. Depends on who's counting them.
24 hours. But if you have,
was it Stalin who said it's not the person who is not controlling voting, it's controlling the counting that's important? That's still true today.
Mm-hmm. But why can't we do that in this country?
We could, but we have an awful lot of people, so it takes time, and people are used to getting the results real fast. But I think with ranked choice voting, we could do that because it's a little more feasible, because you could feed in the first choice and get the computer tabulator to do that just like we do now. And it's only if you don't have a winner of the first choice ranks that you have to eliminate the last person and redistribute their votes. So the last person got the least votes. So those are the votes that you're recounting. So it's not like you have to start from scratch and recount every single ballot necessarily.
I was reading someplace the other day that even with a huge population, if we still had hand counting, it would just be a matter of a couple of 3 days before you'd
It could be.
Yeah.
I haven't looked closely at that, but I know it was done for a long time. Of course, the country was a lot smaller then. I guess that's the question I have is there a certain point beyond which the number of votes becomes difficult to count? And I think back in the old days, we had a lot more volunteers doing that kind of election work. Mm-hmm. And now it's harder to find people to do it, I think. I'm not sure.
I just as soon go back to hand counting.
You like that?
Yeah.
Well, I need to look into
And
that
I hate
some more.
Facebook too, so you know where I am. I'm old man now. State agency performance audits. You mentioned that earlier on.
Excuse me.
Performance audits. What does that mean? State agency performance audits. Yeah, a lot of state agencies involved.
There's a lot of state agencies. I've been talking a lot lately. Sorry.
Of course.
Yeah, there's a lot of state agencies, and an audit means to go in and look at how well they're functioning.
Sure.
And what are their goals? How well are they achieving them? How are they using their money? Is it being used efficiently to meet the goals that they're supposed to be meeting? Excuse me. I don't know if I can go on like this. So I don't know exactly how they choose which programs they audit, but that's essentially what it is. And it's right in my background as a public policy professor to know how these things are done. So that's something I'm also interested in, is how well it's done. Because what I found is people have the sense that these kinds of things are objective and neutral, but it all depends upon the questions you ask, the goals you think are important, and how you frame what they're supposed to be doing. You know, Republicans, Democrats do not see the purpose of an agency the same way necessarily. So you have to ask a lot of questions about what are we not considering when we do this audit? What are we focusing on and what are we neglecting? So I'm curious about how they do that and how they feed that, how they build that into the process.
Well, my hunch is with the way the political system works nowadays, there'll be a lot of agencies who don't want to be audited.
Well, I don't think any of them are eager for it. Nobody is either.
People like you putting your nose in.
I mean, the IRS does audits of your tax paying, and you don't want to get a call from them,
I've
right?
been there, yes, yeah. Government transparency. That's, oh man, you're looking for miracles, aren't you?
Well, because the Secretary of State is the custodian of public records,
Yes.
when the media or the public wants access to a record, it's our job to make that available. But there's ways that can be delayed or stalled or blocked. And my tendency would be to make it easier for people to get these documents, not harder. Because I'm not looking to protect other politicians from being embarrassed, if that's a consideration, or an agency from being embarrassed, an employee of the government for being embarrassed. I would really like to make it more accessible. I would like people to know what the government is doing, unless there's very good reason not to release that information.
Then you do away with WikiLeaks and those kinds of.
They shouldn't have to do that job.
Yeah. Protecting our public lands from private exploitation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's currently the land board is considering selling the Elliott State Forest to private companies, and it's a very controversial question. And I can't say that I've looked into it in detail, but my tendency is to think that we're not really looking at the long-term value of these public lands because we think of them in terms of resources and maybe you know, outdoors activities, either getting logs out of them or mining them or getting people in there to ski and hunt and whatever. But I think we also have to think about climate change and how important those forests are for sequestering carbon. We could be doing a lot of research on how that happens and how it could happen better. You know, learn from the forest about how we can sequester carbon otherwise in our farming practices or other ways. I just think as time goes on, the need to have forests that are not cultivated, not being used for logging and resource extraction is going to be more and more pressing.
Okay. The occupation of that wildlife preserve in eastern Oregon, Melview.
Oh, the Bundy.
Yeah, the
people.
Bundy people.
I was going to say the Brady Bunch, the Bundy Bunch. They had a whole different idea. Yeah, their idea was that there is no such thing as government shouldn't be owning any land. It should belong to the people. So they were trying to take it back. I think government ownership of property is.
Are you a tree hugger?
My wife likes to hug trees. I think trees are important. We can't live without them.
Absolutely.
I mean, they generate oxygen for us for one thing, and like we said earlier, oxygen is pretty important to life, breathing.
So let's see what else I can ask you about. You're a political scientist, huh?
Yeah, for about 20 years.
About how two-party dominance, political gridlock, and big campaign donations have prevented us from addressing major problems such as widespread economic insecurity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, since the 1970s.
Big campaign donations. What are you going to do about that?
Well,
campaign donations.
Election reform is the first one.
Again,
right?
Yeah.
And then that way we can get more voices into the political conversation and shake up the status quo so that the voter's voice is paid more attention to, because I think there's a disconnect between the people who gain elected office, especially at the national level, and the people on the ground. Up there, they tend to see, well, the economy's coming back to life, things are getting better, look at the numbers, look at how we're doing here, we're doing okay. But down here, it's a lot of insecurity on the ground. You know, people, even if you have an income, you're worried about it, right? People who are on Social Security are worried about Social Security being cut back or changed or not even being there. People who have pensions are worrying about those investments crashing or running out on them because they don't have so many traditional pensions where you just get paid from a company you used to work for long term. There's all these IRAs like I have, which if you count on that, what if you live longer than you expect or you have a major expense like a medical bill? So seniors have a lot of economic insecurity. Younger people have economic insecurity because they get out of college and they can't find work as well. A lot of them are in jobs below their educational level or contingency jobs where it's not like a regular employment where you can count on a regular paycheck. You take a project, it's done, you gotta look for another job. You try to scrounge up things. You work for Uber or different companies where you're an independent contractor supposedly, but you're not really self-employed because you're really dependent on these bigger companies for what money you make. So they're feeling very vulnerable, and people in the middle, of course, are feeling very vulnerable. Homes lost a lot of value in the crash. People were thrown out of professions that they'd been in for decades, and now they find that those jobs have disappeared because of automation and cutbacks, and they're trying to find different jobs, or they're retiring early on less money than they would have because they don't know what to do. So on the ground, there's a lot of economic insecurity. At the top, I don't think it always penetrates them that this is still going on. They see the numbers, there's growth, so they assume that means people are going to be doing better, but it's not necessarily so.
How about secretaries of state and other states? Any idea who's doing a better job than?
Oh, gee, I haven't looked at that, but their election systems are so different because they don't have the same. Most don't have mail-in ballots like we do, and they have very different voter registration laws and ballot access requirements and things like that. So yeah, I haven't spent a lot of time looking into that.
Yeah. Where sometimes we compare what the government Oregon is doing with the government in Washington State, for example, and look what's happening in Seattle and this
sometimes they've been a leader.
Socialist and they're farther left than Oregon is probably up there.
It could be. But further east, there's less to look at. Unless you
Not
go
too far east
way up in the northeast somewhere, maybe. As far as learning from them on election systems goes. But there has been ranked choice voting instituted in a number of cities and counties in the country, and those are worth looking at for sure.
So your behavior is going to influence what's happening with climate change, depending on the job that you're doing as Secretary of State?
Well, some minor impact, I hope. We all try to do our part.
Okay, we've got about 8 minutes left, and let's let you freewheel and tell us about what you think the viewers would find useful to hear from you about whatever.
Sticking on my campaign or outside my campaign or what? I'd really say...
Or whatever's on your mind now.
Yeah. The reason I'm doing this is I think we need hope, you know?
Okay.
And it comes from people stepping up and doing what they can. You know, speaking honestly about the things they're feeling and seeing around them, and then looking around for a path forward to the best of your ability and joining with other people to try to move that way. You know, listening to other people respectfully so that when you have a difference, then you can say, okay, you're finding this way forward, I'm finding this way forward. Maybe we can learn from each other and find a way to work together. And I think what people are doing is feeling afraid and discouraged and angry rather than feeling hopeful that we can solve things. And unless you have that sense of hope, you're not going to make the kind of effort and the kind of have the clarity of mind to really notice ways that you can make a difference in life. When you become too cynical, you don't even look for opportunities to make a difference.
What about those people who are cynical, are saying, for generation after generation, I have done what you're suggesting we should do as Americans, and it seems like it is hopeless. There's whole classes of people like in Appalachia and the inner cities who it's hard for them to have hope anymore.
Things do change, though. Things have changed. There's a lot of problems to be
change.
left.
People make things change.
People make things change. Sometimes things change because they have to.
Okay.
Because there's no other way to go. You just have to change or you won't survive. But you look through history and things have changed. Was within our lifetime. We've seen greater openness of government. We've seen people starting to address climate change, even if in minor ways, at least they're recognizing it. We've seen black citizens in the United States gain the right to vote in ways that they hadn't had before, trying to take it away again, but you know, there's been more access to that as well. We've seen equal rights for gays and lesbians. A lot of changes do happen.
Why then are so many black citizens being killed by police?
Boy, that's a difficult question to answer.
You bet it is.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to stick my neck out with some kind of superficial explanation for that when I haven't really researched it. But there's a misunderstanding of this idea of implicit bias. Some people hear implicit bias and they focus on the bias and say, well, if you say I have an implicit bias, you're just saying I hate people of another ethnic background. But what it really means is that we learn from a very early age, deep in our mind, to make distinctions between the things that are significant. And unfortunately, in our society, we make distinctions between people based on their appearance, their color of the skin, things like that. So the classic example is when you're walking down a dark alley and you see a young man approaching. If he's black, you're more likely to feel nervous than he's white, okay? Of course, it all depends on how they're dressed and their demeanor and everything else, but there's this immediate reaction that a black person might be dangerous, not only for a white person in this country, but black people learn that as well. So there's this, I think there's a tendency in police when they're dealing with a black person that they do not know to have this sense that this might be a dangerous situation. They're not necessarily consciously thinking this, but they're already on guard. This is my theory, this is just speculation, so that they're more quick to use force and violence than they would be otherwise.
So I guess I'm looking for answers to how it is so many people, not just black people in the inner cities, but in Appalachia and the very poor areas of the country, and have been this way for generation after generation. And there's something we're not doing right, or something we need to change to have that be different quicker.
Sure.
At my age, I want to see it happen sooner.
Before time runs out for you, huh? I think, and this is something that's getting more attention from more people than there had been a long time. I think eventually our country's going to have to move toward a guaranteed annual income for everybody.
Oh man!
Yeah, jobs are disappearing.
Really a socialist, aren't you?
I don't know, socialism.
I am.
That's fine. My background, I would say, I come out of the socialist tradition. Like I said earlier, I think we need a new political vocabulary, because I think people have very different visions of what socialism means. And I would want to be really specific about if I used that term, what I meant. But jobs are disappearing because of automation. Robots in blue-collar work first, and now it's happening in white-collar work with computerization. And pretty soon there's not going to be a lot for people to do other than serve people who have lots of money.
I think we're blaming automation too much. Its behavior and the need for more money and more wealth, and it's never diminishes, never diminish. It doesn't diminish as time goes by. because that is the driving force behind the people who have the money and the power to run the government.
Oh, there's that too. When you get too much money in certain hands and not enough for other people, there's that too. But I think when we rely on jobs for an income and jobs are disappearing because of automation, I think that's different now than it was even 40 years ago.
Okay, even with automation, I think the profit or the money earned, if it were distributed more evenly, then we wouldn't say the main reason is because of automation. I'm arguing that point with you. That's all.
Okay, I'm not sure how much we disagree, because if the money was distributed more fairly, a guaranteed annual income would do that as well.
You're right on. So we have about a minute and a half left for you to say anything more at all you want to say to the viewers about whatever.
The viewers, am I looking at the right camera? Yes, this way. Hello.
The red camera.
Thank you for listening. I've appreciated having the opportunity to talk to Don and to make my views better known. Again, I'm Alan Zundel, running for Secretary of State. A lot of the things we talked about today have nothing to do with my office. But the most important thing I'm running on is election reform, so that people have a greater voice in government. You know, you don't have to implement all my ideas if you don't like them. It's to give us all a voice so we can have that conversation. And so thank you for giving me that opportunity.
Oh, and I'm in the same camp as you. It doesn't seem like we're just doing a kumbaya together. But I think your ideas are really right on.
Thank you.
Let's do a few public service announcements before we sign off. To get my show's local broadcast schedule, go to www.donbaham.com and click on Present Day Activities. That's the schedule. And you can watch my shows on the web by Googling Don Baham YouTube. There's hundreds of shows on there, and you'll find it pretty interesting to learn more about the American Civil Liberties Union. I'm a member of the ACLU for what seems like centuries, and go to that website and learn more about the ACLU. Without the ACLU, our civil liberties would be further down the tube than they are. And to get my shows broadcast by other stations around the country, ask your local public access station to go to www.pegmedia.org and follow instructions there on how to get them to be able to show our shows in their local neighborhoods. And we got to end corporate personhood. You go to www.movetoamend.org, and we got to change the Constitution so that corporations are not considered persons and money is not speech. And remember, KFC, not Kentucky Fried Chicken, Dr. Don's KFC. Kind, friendly, and charitable. Be kind and be friendly and be charitable to you too. And you too, and you too, and you are kind, friendly, and charitable. Right now I can show.
I certainly tried to be.
And you too. See you next time. Bye.
Thank you.